think we are waiting for Ms. Bergstrom.
Oh, there's Pam.
Again, everyone, we're just waiting for all members of the committee and central office administrative staff to join our meeting. We'll start momentarily.
Frida, if you hear me, I have the Zoom for the 12 o'clock meeting just sent to me via email, so I'm all set. Thank you very much.
So I would just ask everyone who is a panelist if you're all fully logged in and able to hear. Looks like we are. Dr. Evans, do you see anybody that we're waiting for still?
Our new tech director is probably listening as an attendee, but there's no tech issues that I'm anticipating he'll need to answer today. We can always elevate him if needed.
Sounds good. Then with that, I would like to call to order the remote school committee meeting of August 6th, 2020 at 11 a.m. due to COVID closure. On today's agenda, I'm going to say up front that we have a short meeting because of conflicts of time for a number of members here. We'll have public comment. We will have a report and discussion item on return to school 2021, and then that will be followed by an action item, a vote on return to school 2021. We may have a chair report and a superintendent report, depending on how much time permits. Future agenda items, we have none listed because this was a meeting scheduled separately. The future agenda items are as listed on our last meeting, future meeting dates and adjournment. With that, I would like to go into public comment. But before I do, I would like to remind everyone that public comment is a chance for members of the public to express their opinions on matters under the jurisdiction of the school committee. It's not a dialogue, and the committee is under no obligation to respond to comments. We are on a tight timeline today, so I'm going to limit public comments strictly to 20 minutes, so we have time for discussion among the committee. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, but the briefer and more succinct you can be, the more individuals we can hear from. We've received many, many emails, and I know every member of the committee reads every email. We fielded phone calls, we hear you, we hear how important this decision is to you. So I want to make sure it's clear that we received over an hour of public comment on Tuesday, and we've been hearing from the community, I would say nonstop, 24 hours a day since then. So I want to make sure that's well understood. We have a number of hands raised. I'm going to call on hands in order that I've seen them. And if we suddenly discover that we have a number of comments on one particular aspect, and we would like to try to see if we get some other thoughts, I may ask if we lower our hands and go in a different direction, but we'll see how that goes. So with that, I would like to elevate to talk. Do not know your name, be on, and I would like you to state your name and address for the committee, and then remember that you have no more than 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, this is Beyond You. I live at 38 Fletcher Street. I have a rising first grader and a newborn at home. And first off, I wanted to thank you all for the work that you continue to do for all of us. I know you're being pulled in many directions right now. I've been watching the number of cases in Massachusetts, and over the past few weeks, we haven't been going in the right direction. In the absence of timely guidance from the state, I want our community to be proactive instead of reactive and err on the side of caution with respect to reopening schools. We don't have to look hard for cautionary tales such as the outbreaks related to school reopenings in Indiana, Georgia, and Israel. And there's also a recent paper in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which looks at the effect of school closure on the incidence of COVID-19. The conclusion was that schools that decided to close earlier showed a larger relative reduction in infection and death. Based on these data and without a routine COVID testing plan, I strongly urge you to consider a remote start to the school year with a phased reopening. thanks so much for your time. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your succinctness. With that, I will move to Mr. Tom Hopcroft. I'm trying to, Mr. Hopcroft, if you state your name and address for the committee.
Morning. I'm Tom Hopcroft. I live with my wife Victoria at 99 Pond Street. We have a rising first grader at Lynch and a sixth grader at McCall. We're a dual income family, both working full-time for companies not deemed essential frontline organizations. And our companies have made the decision to continue with a remote workforce as a result of the pandemic until at least 2021. I want to thank you for the tremendous investment of time you're dedicating, and thank you for providing parents an opportunity to share input. We'd also like to share that the use of Zoom has enabled us, like many other parents, to participate in this process while simultaneously multitasking with children and work responsibilities. So in thinking about our goals, we talk a lot about returning our kids to school, but we feel that our goal should be to provide equitable and consistent education to students, especially the most vulnerable or at risk. Of course, we all want our kids to be in school, but some need to be in school because they're food insecure and they get fed there, or their parents are essential frontline workers who cannot be home, or they have a special need that requires in-person interaction. Similarly, some children need to be remote. They have a medical condition or have an at-risk family member where their risk tolerance otherwise prevents in-person education. Governor Baker used a phased approach for reopening business a little bit at a time with the most essential workers first to allow data gathering at each stage. We think this is the right approach for our schools as well. Start remote, then phase in the students who must be in school first before phasing in those without an absolute need. All groups, remote or hybrid, deserve the same level of and quality of education. We should have the same curriculum, levels of synchronicity, and in-district teachers across all the different groups. We should also be aware that some voices are louder than others and gather the data to ensure that we don't create disparities between groups with different racial or ethnic backgrounds, income levels, or special needs. It's worth noting that the Boston Public Schools found that white parents favored in-person education at more than twice the rate of Black and Latinx, who favored full remote at more than twice the rate of white parents. So we should be sure that we're gathering the demographic data in our surveys to be sure that we understand how our decisions will impact various groups within our community. When we consider that remote students will be 100% remote and hybrid students will be 60% remote until some undefined trigger causes them to go 100% remote. And by the way, do we have the rapid testing capabilities in our schools and within our community to know when students contract COVID? We should be investing time and treasure now in developing a remote first strategy and curriculum as a consistent foundation for all, whether remote or hybrid students. A single framework is essential to provide an equitable, consistent educational experience to all of our students. Finally, I'd like to touch on the feasibility of simultaneous teaching of remote and hybrid students. I feel this is essential to delivering as close to the same educational experience for students, all students, as possible. The Boston Public Schools have committed to it, and we do it every day in the business world. We can use remote learning approaches with interactive tools to enhance and deliver a
Mr. Hopcroft, we are at 3 minutes. I would like to ask if you could just finish your last couple sentences.
I will. Okay. I'll stop there and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hopcroft. I'm going to elevate Ms. Hunt. Ms. Hunt, you have state your name and address for the committee, please.
Thank you. My name is Ideen Hunt, and I'm a teacher at Lincoln Elementary School. And I just briefly want to just suggest that remote learning does not impact just one group within our school community, but in fact, it's to ensure the safety of everyone, administrators, teachers, students, and their families. So I'm hopeful that as the school committee making this decision, you will keep that in mind. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your service to students of Winchester, and thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for making them brief. I would like to elevate Ms. Plosky. Ms. Plosky, if you state your name and address for the committee.
Thank you. My name is Carolyn Plosky. I live at 31 Sargent Road here in Winchester. I'm the parent of both a rising 9th grader as well as a rising 6th grader. And I'm a national board certified secondary English teacher here in Winchester. I'm also the director of English for grades 6 through 12. Thank you for dedicating so many hours to determining the path of our schools in a constantly shifting landscape with absolutely no guarantees. I'm speaking today to urge you to continue with the remote model for the entire district until we can safely phase in a return to school. As you consider the environment of a socially distanced classroom versus a virtual classroom, I hope you will take into account the attributes of each. A socially distanced classroom where students sit 6 feet apart facing forward does not reflect sound educational practice. Such an environment requires a lecture-based format that impedes access and participation. Very few students learn through simply absorbing what they hear and see. Such a practice actually widens. Classrooms have not looked like that for over 20 years. But it is easy to understand the public distaste for digital learning when it is only based on the 3.5 months of this past spring, when we were beamed into your homes. Teaching virtually for the first time was comparable to student teaching, but with public witness instead of university support. However, amazing things did happen and can happen online. Unlike when sequestered 6 feet apart, a student-centered remote classroom allows for one-on-one support, small group discussion, stations, differentiation, inquiry-based research, and movement, all hallmarks of excellent teaching. Adding attendance, grades, professional development, and evaluation will only enhance that. So that we can research and reflect, I encourage you to commit to remote learning. Instead of having to eliminate coveted classes, compel teachers to take leave, or spend thousands of dollars on PPE, I implore you to devote our resources to developing the engaging remote program possible. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Plosky, and thank you again for your service to our students. I'm going to disable talking. We can take about 4 more comments. I'm going to elevate Mr. Cedrone. I apologize if your C is hard or soft. Mr. Cedrone, I'd like if you could state your name and address for the committee.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to unmute.
That's okay.
Cedrone, 11 Marion Street. Thank you. First off, I just want to thank Dr. Evans and the school committee again for your leadership on these issues. Today, I'm speaking as a parent and educator. I can't stress enough how important I feel a phased, thoughtful, data-driven reopening plan is right now. Everyone has struggled over the last few months, and one thing I am certain of is that children are resilient, and they will recover academically and socially. I have been disheartened by some of the narratives in town regarding the reopening. Demanding more from schools is an uninformed and inappropriate stance right now. I do not believe many fully understand the handcuffing restraints of the budget, staffing, and space that we feel in schools. In addition, asking public educators and staff to assume a higher threshold of risk for self-serving purposes of childcare or convenience is unethical and disrespectful to our field. Allowing the burden of the pandemic to be placed solely on public schools is wrong. As you know, in schools, we're driven by FAPE, that is free, appropriate public education. Right now, appropriate is the key word to consider in that statement. It is not appropriate during a pandemic to meet in person with large numbers of people indoors. No industry is doing so, so why would we ask our schools to do any different? For every article or study or expert that says reopening is safe, I can find you one that says the contrary. This does not tell me that my side is right and the other one is wrong. It tells me that there is still so much unknown about this virus and that the disagreement is the norm. So erring on the side of caution should be imperative. In my opinion, the only thing more damaging than the quarantine to our students' mental health would be an outbreak in their school, resulting in another emergency closure after parents, leaders, and teachers had assured them it was safe to return. I cannot imagine how unsafe that would make our children feel. Many feel another closure is inevitable. If we even believe it's a potential reality, more the reason to ease into the year to avoid a roller coaster of fear and heightened emotions by starting virtually or in a hybrid model. Lastly, I just want to make sure I speak to our teachers. I know how distraught emotionally they have been thinking about over the last few weeks and months. I've connected with Winchester educators at the elementary, middle, and high school level. I assure you, our fantastic Winchester educators over the years have dedicated their lives to educating our children. Please, however, do not mistake that for them being prepared to risk their lives to educate our children. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I'm going to disable talking, and I'm going to, we have time for 3 more comments. I'm going to elevate Ms. McCarthy. Ms. McCarthy, please state your name and address for the committee.
Mr. Vernelia, can I just point out that Miss Rebecca Cummings has been dropped twice now? I think so I'm not sure. She keeps
Thank you,
getting
Ms.
pushed back
Bergstrom.
in the line.
Thank you very much. At this time, the list sort of moves around. At this time, I've elevated Ms. McCarthy. If you would state your name and address for the committee, please.
Hi, my name is Michelle McCarthy. I live at 29 Oxford Street in Winchester. Again, thank you to everybody for all of your hard work on this. I would like to ask the school committee to please vote in support of Dr. Evans' plan that she put forward. I strongly believe that our children need to be back in school, even if it's for the 2 days. I think the spring was very difficult for everybody, but we love the teachers in Winchester. They truly do an amazing job. And I hope that with the social distancing measures that the school can put in place, that our kids can get back in school for certain hours a week with a hybrid model and hopefully move into more as hopefully this pandemic changes. Thank you so much to everyone again. And I ask the school committee again for your vote, please, in support of getting our children back to school. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCarthy. We will take the next one in the list here. Ms. Trying to get it.
I see 3 people that are continually getting dropped, Mr. Chair.
They keep on. I agree. They keep on moving. They keep on moving around, and I keep on trying to take the next people, and they keep on being dropped. So I've accepted, elevated Ms. Cummings.
Thank you.
Yes, we can. My apologies. The list of people who have hands raised keeps on raising and being raised and lowered. So
No
my
worries.
apologies.
We're all experiencing the challenges of technology together.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Rebecca Cummings. I've been a teacher for more than 20 years and a teacher in Winchester for nearly half that time. I'm also the parent of a rising special needs 3rd grader at VO. I would like to read a letter that was submitted to the school committee last night. It is signed by over 400 of the trusted educators who have taught and loved your children for years in the Winchester Public Schools. Dear Mr. Vernelia, Ms. Bolognese, Ms. Bergstrom, Mr. Nixon, and Ms. Marchand, thank you for the many hours that you have spent during the past few months participating in meetings, poring over data, and reading countless communications. We recognize that this was not what you envisioned when you assumed this role, and we appreciate your unwavering commitment to serving the Winchester community. We are writing as your educators, representing grades pre-K through 12, to advocate for your rejection of the proposed hybrid model for returning to school. The hybrid model does not make sense pedagogically or financially. While there's nothing we would like more than to be surrounded by our students as much as possible, it is just not safe or educationally responsible to endorse the hybrid model at the moment. Socially distanced classrooms prevent one-on-one support, small group discussions, stations, and movement, which are all hallmarks of good pedagogy. They turn age-appropriate behaviors into infractions that will forever shape students' sense of value and safety in a classroom. To resort to the lecture model that socially distanced learning demands would limit the effectiveness of our teachers because very few individuals learn well that way. Small group work, inquiry-based research, hands-on projects, movement, student presentations, and individual differentiation when online with students is more achievable than in a socially distanced classroom. In addition, the hybrid model also requires each lesson to be taught twice to two different groups of students, whereas in a remote classroom, instruction can be delivered once to an entire class with targeted reinforcement where necessary, effectively allowing for deeper and broader coverage of curriculum content. Preparing for the hybrid version, even if it only endures for a few days or a few weeks, is financially unsound. Replacement of teachers taking leaves of absence is expensive, whether the teacher on leave is being paid or not. Vast amounts of time are being spent recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and training new faculty and staff. Personal protective equipment, inadequate ventilation mitigation, and cleaning supplies are all being procured at tremendous expense. Reconfiguring
Ms.
schedules.
Cummings, I would point out that you are now at 3 minutes. Do you have a couple sentences to finish what you're saying?
Sure. It would be so much more effective to focus our energies on funding and preparing for remote learning as best as possible, becoming educated about practicing with the best possible platforms and technologies, and strategizing on how to best meet the social emotional needs of our students when they enter our digital classrooms. We urge you to reject the hybrid model and dedicate our resources to developing the best remote learning environment that we can until we can safely phase into a full return to school. Thank you so much, with appreciation from over 400 of the Winchester Public School teachers.
Thank you, Ms. Cummings. I appreciate your service to our students, and thank you for your comments. With that, we're going to close public comment and go to the next portion of our meeting, which will be report and discussion items, Return to School 2021. Dr. Evans, I would like to turn to you and ask you what you're looking for today, where you see the district moving ahead, and turn it over to you briefly before we have our discussion.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that, having an opportunity to speak at this point. Every school committee in the Commonwealth is in the same boat you are, every superintendent, every teacher. We all want the same thing. We want to get back to in-person education as soon as it's safe to do so. The problem is the metrics for deciding that are very subjective, and different stakeholders have different opinions about this. We've heard from thousands of them, and there are many parents who feel the only acceptable option is a full return with no restrictions. Many other parents who feel the only acceptable option is a full remote option. Your task is not to decide what's going to happen on September 14th today. Your task is to approve the draft plan for submission to the DESE by August 10th, which is early next week. And so we have provided two alternatives in this plan for families. One is a hybrid model that has students in school for a couple of days a week, with additional supports for at-risk learners who will come for more days. It also provides a full remote model for those families who wish to choose that option. This is not the easiest or cheapest solution for us to open school, but it is, I think, the right solution if we are able to adequately staff it. And so what I would say is I'm fully aware that there are some faculty members who aren't able to return for medical reasons. And should this number tip above a certain point, I will not be able to staff anything other than full remote. And so the course of the illness over the next few weeks, the number of faculty members who might ask for medical leaves, our ability to hire replacements, all of that could change the decision at any point in time. But right now, you're not deciding firmly what's going to happen on September 14th. Much like any day in the winter in any typical year, I can't guarantee the next day won't be a snow day. And so we have a lot of difficult work ahead of us. What I would say is it's somewhat misguided to suggest that we still will not be planning for 3 different scenarios. At some point, we will be fully in person. What the restrictions will be for the full return is to be determined. We will also at some point be in hybrid. My concern is a vote today to go to a full hybrid model to start the year means we're fully hybrid for at least through 2021. it's going to be very difficult in the middle of cold and flu season for us to jump in and start to bring students back. I think there are tremendous benefits to starting the year hybrid, to build social emotional relationships, to provide additional supports for at-risk students, and to support our community members who feel that that's the only viable option for their families. So I would recommend that the school committee vote to support the plan as drafted for presentation to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for feedback, with the understanding that the situation could change at any time, as we are fully prepared to do, up to and including the day we're supposed to start school, if our community spread is too high, or the advice we get from public health determines that, or we have additional cases of illness in our school community, and that we move forward with that plan. This allows two options, and if we can staff it adequately, will enable us to meet the needs of more families than one or the other. So that's my recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. I would open it up to the committee as far as questions, comments, statements they would like to make. Ms. Marchant?
I'll go ahead then and start, since this is going to be a very difficult conversation. I love and adore all of the teachers who signed on to that letter. I know a good number of them. They've personally taught my own children, and I'm forever grateful. I've bonded with them. I'm fully in support of them. Everything I can do, I do for my children's teachers and for the teachers of Winchester. This isn't a good position to be in, because we're being asked to make a decision that has impacts on people's health, on people's livelihood, on children's education. And I feel the state has really put us in a very bad spot. They should have made the decision a little more quicker and a little more thorough of a decision. I don't really have a question per se, but I would like to list some of the things I am considering. And I'm going to put myself out here pretty quickly in support of the hybrid model. First of all, not only am I concerned for our teachers' health, but I'm also concerned for their livelihood. Once we start pushing off into a full remote option, how many jobs is that going to cost? There are a lot of staff in our district who are paid when they show up for work, whether it's ESPs or a number of staff, and I can't even list them all, and Judy and the rest of the administration could help me if needed. But what happens to all of those people who have to be in the aides, the special education aides, all of those people? I'm really concerned about them finding themselves stranded. The next issue I have is that we have a good sized population of students who we consider to be high needs, whether if it's for special education, whether if it's for neglect and abuse, whether it's for free and reduced lunch. Those students I worry about deeply, especially the neglect and abuse kids. I don't want them to have to show up to school and be the only ones in the school building. I feel like that ostracizes them. If instead we bring in a thoughtful, health conscious way, more students, I feel like that takes away from the stigma of, oh, we're here because we're X, Y, or Z. So I think that helps our high needs population feel protected, their identities especially. I also have been reading nonstop articles from experts in the New York Times, on NPR, and I compare the plan. We have been great, and I'm grateful for the plan that Dr. Evans presented. We meet all of the metrics that say it's a good plan. It's good for the state of where we're at. And so she has, with the support of central office and the COVID planning team, has hit every one of those things, whether it's transportation or social distancing, masks, all of these requirements this plan has met from experts, which I cannot claim to be. I'm not an epidemiologist. The next thing is I looked at the dashboard. I have the website up, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health COVID-19 dashboard for today, August 5th. And if I look at that dashboard, it shows me that COVID-19 positive test rates are in the green, that we're in a positive trend. I know people have cited from, I don't know where, that rates are going up, but according to this centralized database of experts from the Public Health Department, we're in the green. That tells me that as of August 5th, the hybrid model is the best model for us moving forward, at least in submission to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. If that changes, then we have to come back to the table and talk about what September 14th has to look like as we're moving closer. But the state has put us in a bind so that we have to make this decision before the 10th, and that's what we're doing. So based on this information, the hybrid model looks to be the safest, most productive route as of today's data. And I mean, I want the community to see our teachers in action, whether we're in full remote, whether we're in hybrid. On September 14th, our teachers are going to be in the buildings working hard and demonstrating their immeasurable value to our community. And so for all of these reasons, I'm leaning towards the hybrid model. And I appreciate this time. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Does anybody else on the committee? Mr. Nixon, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Brian?
Yes, we can very well. Thank you.
So I appreciate my colleagues' comments. I have a few remarks that are going to lead me to make what I'm going to call a friendly motion, one that I hope is not controversial, a motion to amend the plan. I want to just make a few observations if I wasn't clear at the meeting on Tuesday. As our community knows, Dr. Evans made the quick call and the right call to close Ambrose a day early in the spring when we had a positive case at that elementary school. We did not have a vaccine for coronavirus then, and we don't have one today. So an appropriate question is, you're contemplating opening school, so what's changed? What's the difference? Coronavirus is still here. So what's changed is our behavior. That is the use of masks and hand washing. It's changed the behavior of families, their parents' engagement, whether in the workplace, through social distancing. It's changed the behavior of many of our kids and the various activities they're engaged in, even today outside of school. Our physical environment has changed. We see it at the grocery store, we see it at the bank, and Dr. Evans has presented a plan that calls for our physical environment to change in light of separating students, for example, in a hybrid model, Group A, Group B. So it's changed because we're talking about half the density of students, and we're talking about 6-foot spacing. And frankly, in general, our awareness has changed. Our awareness as parents has changed. The awareness of our children has changed. The awareness of the healthcare community has changed. So even though there's no vaccine, our healthcare community is better able to see, identify, manage, and treat to some extent. So I do believe we're sort of in a different place than we were in the spring. But as I did say on Tuesday, as much as I appreciate all the detail in the plan, what I did feel was missing was this, that if the school committee should come to vote to accept any plan, that's simply, to Dr. Evans's point, this is what we're sending to the state, but our vote does indicate a preference. So all things being equal, assuming there is no other major change at some macro level, this presumably would be our plan. If the school committee majority supports a hybrid model, then that would be how we start the school year. But I'm uncomfortable voting the plan as it exists right now without some added language. as I hope I indicated on Tuesday, starting off the school year is one thing, but I think it's important for us to be aware of and mindful of the healthcare metrics that matter. And so that might be Winchester's infection rate, hospitalization rate. But it's not just Winchester, as we've heard from many of our teachers, and we know this, many of our teachers don't live in Winchester, they live in surrounding communities. So if it is, and I'll use air quotes, safe by someone's measure to start school on September 14th, how do we know 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in that it's still safe to do so? So what information should we be looking for? Who do we seek advice from if we need to make a change? So I think of it this way: if each school year is the start of an exciting journey for our students and teachers, and I believe that each school year is, this is an important journey to take because of the social and emotional importance, the social emotional wellness of our students, the connection they need with their teachers. I appreciate very much the remarks of Mr. Cedrone on Tuesday and Thursday about the need to sort of take some steps in this process. But if each school year is the start of an exciting and important journey, my concern is that this school year, the journey could become dangerous if we don't know when to turn around and come back. And what I mean by that is pulling back from, let's say, hybrid to remote. Similarly, many parents in our communities have asked, at what point would you look to open up school fully 5 days a week? It's hard for me to imagine. I don't expect we're going to have a vaccine at scale for 6 to 7 months, but I think it really is a legitimate question. And so, Mr. Chairman, if you would be so kind to permit me to share screen, I have a motion that I wanted to propose, and I've pulled it up here big enough that certainly to the extent folks watching can see it, it might be
You
helpful.
should have ability, Mr. Nixon, to share your screen.
Okay, let me try that. I appreciate it.
I would remind the committee that we do have a hard stop today at 12 o'clock. This is a very important issue, but at the same time, we also do have a hard stop.
So I hope, can you see this?
Yes,
Ryan?
we can.
Thank you.
Very well.
Okay. So just to call attention to, and I'm going to use the same trick I suggested to the superintendent yesterday, so this becomes a little more visible on screen. So in the plan, it's page 14 of our draft. Dr. Evans notes the district has strengthened connections and a process to work with the Winchester Board of Health to share information and ensure compliance with statewide and local guidance and plans, for instance, health and safety updates, COVID-19 testing availability of flu vaccines, etc. So I move to add the following. The Winchester School Committee will hold regular joint meetings with the Winchester Board of Health at least every 3 weeks this fall, the first to be held before the first professional day of the school year, to A, review and understand current Winchester COVID-19 infection data, B, discuss and develop a representative demographic area for ongoing monitoring that could include Winchester plus some number of surrounding communities, and C, to discuss and develop key metrics and threshold values which will trigger a change in the operating model, whether to a more or less restrictive. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify, in making this motion at the front of the plan, this doesn't seek to change the full remote model, the full open model, the hybrid model. This actually seeks to sort of institute a process that we could share with the Board of Health that would inform our decision-making once school opens. Thank you.
Mr. Nixon, may I ask a clarifying question about your proposed amendment?
Sure.
Would you be amenable to it being not a joint meeting, but a meeting with the Director of Public Health, Ms. Murphy, on at least every 3 weeks, as opposed to trying to schedule a joint meeting with the Board of Health?
I appreciate that question, and I know where it comes from because it's difficult to herd cats and schedule meetings with multiple boards. I should offer sort of what prompted me to even make this motion. So I voiced this concern at the meeting on Tuesday, and subsequent to the meeting, I got an email from the chair of the Board of Health, Dr. Batari. She's an emergency room physician who expressed real interest in working with us. We have, as you well know, from time to time, we do engage with other boards in joint meetings, and I can think of nothing more important than the decision that we have ahead of us, but also the decision making that kind of comes as we go forward. So I'd hold firm with the motion because I certainly value Jen Murphy tremendously. I also value the opportunity to engage with her and her board.
Thank you very much. Would you be amenable to holding this motion until we get to voting and we continue to allow members around the table to discuss the plan as a whole? And then when we get to voting, this will be the first order of business to vote to amend this if it's desired by the committee.
I think that's your call as chair. I think that's
I'm making that
so
call.
long as we can come back to it.
May I ask you to cease sharing your screen? And may I ask if anyone else in the committee has any comments or questions they'd like to ask? Ms. Bergstrom.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I first want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank all of the educators who have come to us today. As a longtime advocate of public education and former teacher myself, I think back to the words of J.K. Rowling in her Harry Potter novels. It takes a good deal of courage to stand up to your enemies. It takes an even greater amount of courage to stand up to your friends. And I realize that our educators are friends of this district. They're friends with many of the administrators here. We work as a collaborative team. So be able to speak publicly and come out and oppose a plan that has been put forward, I think it takes a great deal of courage. And I just wanted to thank them for that at the outset. Many of the people watching today, I noticed it's a really full audience, may not be familiar with each of the school committee members personally. I just wanted to comment that I have 3 kids in this district at all different levels of education, all different needs in terms of what would be the appropriate setting for them and in terms of the services that they need to be successful in school. I believe each of my kids would benefit from each of these models uniquely. So when I am approaching this impossible task that the Department of Education has put before school committees, I'm not looking at my own kids, and I can't decide what works best for my family, but I have to decide what works best for an entire community of students and staff. We have 4,700 kids and families attached to them, and we have to take all of those considerations into account when we make a decision. Often at school committee, when we're discussing curriculum issues, we admit that we ourselves are not the experts, and we look back to our educators to advise us on what the best educational model pedagogically is moving forward in the district. We do not select curriculum ourselves. We do that in collaboration with our educators. I have heard an overwhelming number of our educators say today that pedagogically, the hybrid model is not what they deem to be the most successful for the majority of our students in this district. I have also heard them advocate for a phased-in approach to returning to school, one at which we can meet the needs of our students that have special needs, that we can meet the needs of our most vulnerable students while also teaching remotely. What does the health and scientific data tell us? To be fair, it tells us quite a bit. And as Ms. Marchant pointed out, the data on the dashboard today tells us one thing. Governor Baker yesterday told us that the numbers were rising in Massachusetts and that he was considering pulling back restrictions statewide because of the increase in the numbers of COVID cases over the last 7 days. This data is coming at us constantly, and it is always changing. What we do today might not be what we could do tomorrow, but what I do want to be able to do is provide a fair and appropriate education to all of our students. The model that we have put forward for the hybrid plan has, understandably, because of our resources in this district, a fairly broad overlook at what a full remote learning plan would look like, or what a full remote planning would look like for our students who are unable to attend school. or the teachers who are unable to come back to work. We've talked about using models that the state has put forward to replace Winchester delivered education. I have looked into these models, the Florida virtual school and the Edgenuity that is put forward, as well as the models that our own state has for virtual learning. The models for our own state for virtual learning have MCAS scores far below what we are typically seeing here in Winchester. Florida Virtual School and Edgenuity have little research to back them up in terms of what they present. I think that if we are going to promote a remote program that perhaps 20% of our students are going to use, we also need to make sure that the remote programs we're providing are fair, appropriate public education for students who choose remote learning options as well. I have been pleased by the thoughtfulness of our entire district and our superintendent, our assistant superintendent, and everyone in the central office who is working to provide the best education for our kids. We kept all of our staff employed last spring. We made a commitment to keeping all of our staff employed and even made a commitment to this community of why keeping our ESPs and all of our staff in our district employed was necessary. I don't see that a remote learning model going forward at this point should change that. I'm not advocating right now for one method over another, but I am asking this committee to ask the hard questions and take the time. And if we need to go beyond noon today to make that happen, we need to make the commitment to do that. We need to make sure that the plans we're putting forward are equitable for all of our kids, remote or in person, special needs or high achieving, AP students or general education students, working families, and families that have stay-at-home parents. I know it seems like we are trying to make an impossible choice here, but it needs to be one that we are completely confident in moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Ms. Bolognese, do you have any comments you'd like to make at this time?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernelia. And thank you as well to our community members and also to our educators and staff who have worked tirelessly and who have reached out to us and spoken. I appreciate all of your feedback, and like everybody else on this committee, I have read each of your emails and tried to listen as carefully as possible. I guess I less than comments, I did have some questions about this.
Absolutely.
Pardon me?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. So, and I guess our educators have indicated how they visualize a socially distanced classroom. And I guess I would just ask Dr. Evans, can you provide any further insight on how our classroom would look? Would it be more of a lecture style, or I guess how this would look? We can go one at a time for.
Sure. Couple of just caveats before I answer. We've only got about 10 minutes remaining in the scheduled time that we had before us. I understand that one school committee member has a hard stop at noon. I have a hard stop at noon as well because I've committed months ago to speak at Rotary today, and I keep my word. And so I don't want to keep the Rotarians waiting. So I will drop out at noon. If you continue to meet, Janelle and Emma and the other central office administrators can answer any questions for you that you might have. So what I would say is any hybrid return at any point in the year is going to look different than a full return. Additional social distancing requirements with masks, restrictions of students to cohorts, all of those pieces that come along with teaching in a pandemic make teaching and learning look different. But I don't think it means that we just give up and put everybody remote. Some of our students cannot learn well remotely. And so some students will need to come in person if it's safe to do so. So while it's not the ideal form of learning, certainly not one we would ever advocate for, in my opinion, it's better than full remote.
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
And then Ms. Bergstrom had also talked a bit about the contractor provided options. Could you or Dr. Elenema provide any of your insight on those options and what their feasibility is for Winchester?
Sure. So just briefly, it's our intent K-5 to use only Winchester educators to teach our students both in person or remote. If we go fully remote, it may still be that we'll need to contract out for some additional services or courses because we may not have a good match between the students who need the courses and the teachers available to teach them because of a number of restrictions and specialized services. What I can say is I'm disappointed in the state's offerings. They wouldn't be my first choice. They would be my last choice. However, we're going to make every attempt to accommodate every student who chooses remote learning, regardless of the content that they choose. And if we're in a situation where I don't have a teacher to teach a certain subject and only a couple of students who want to take it, as I said in the plan, there are several different pathways that Dennis Mahoney, the high school principal, and I have laid out, including, as we do every year, putting some cohorts of kids into community college or other college courses, taking advantage of state online courses or national online courses for high school students. I've talked with other superintendents about having one of their teachers take on remote responsibility for our students. We can be pretty creative with this. What I would say is we're not as nimble and agile to switch between models as people might think. So people who choose a full remote model, if we also have a hybrid model, it may be hard for us to bring them back in person because we may have to collapse sections in order to create remote sections, depending on how many students choose this. And so we'll need some re-entry points, possibly at the end of a quarter or a semester, to bring people back. Might have to hire additional staff to bring people back. It's all more complicated, particularly with over 600 different courses at the high school and math tracking at the middle school and leveling. And so schedules are complex, but I don't believe in the end we'll be taking much advantage of the state provided content.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bolognese, do you have additional questions?
And I guess you had alluded earlier, Dr. Evans, that if we have teachers who opt to take a medical leave or cannot come back, do we anticipate that, I guess, would we be able to access these teachers to teach our children if they have not opted to come back in person?
So staffing is complicated, as you might imagine, with several hundred teachers. What I would say is Lori Kirby meets with each person who has a concern, a medical concern, reviews what their accommodations are. If we can accommodate, we accommodate. Some teachers would prefer to teach remotely, not for their own medical conditions, but those of family members. There are laws governing that, what kinds of leaves they can take, paid or unpaid. We have many pregnant teachers who would prefer not to come back in person, but is that a reason for them to teach remotely medically? All of those cases vary individually. So what I would say is we're in the process of hiring some leave of absence replacements for some teachers who won't be able to come back. There are some people who aren't even in state or in country on our staff who are caring for other family members or for whatever reason can't come back. So lots and lots of moving parts. What I would say is there are still some people whose family responsibilities won't permit them to teach even remotely, and we need to get substitutes for those people. It has a budget impact because we have to pay for some form, if it's childcare leave for them. And so it is complex. Personnel decision making is always complex. But right now, given the first round of medical excuses, I feel I can staff the hybrid model. That may change in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And so we'll see where we land. I think I've been pretty clear that there's a certain tipping point beyond which we can't support that.
Ms. Bolognese.
And then just last of all, we've heard many times about our experience, or about our community's experiences with distance learning in the spring, and their concerns about how that had proceeded. And will we be able to put in the guidelines, expectations to ensure that we have the amount of meeting time with students, the support for students and our teachers, interactions between teachers and students, and feedback that our students deserve?
So I think I've spoken about this several times, but I'm glad you asked this question again. We're engaged robustly in curriculum work and in training to be ready for all eventualities, including a remote learning, which many of our teachers will engage in, even in the hybrid model. We learned a lot of lessons from the spring. We are not prepared to offer 6 hours of online instruction for every student every day. It's not a model we support. We don't want kids sitting in front of devices. Remote learning is not as good as in-person learning, ever, for K-12. It's just not. But we will make it better, and we'll make it more robust. We will have traditional grading. We'll have accountability. We'll take attendance. We'll work on student engagement. Our teachers last spring, many of whom had never done any form of remote learning, did an amazing job. And to hear them criticized in the community is painful. This is a collective bargaining issue. And so those specifics have to be ironed out. But the indications I have from our very collaborative and student-centered union is that they're going to do everything they can to make any portion of the year that's remote to be as rigorous and engaging and high quality as possible. And so we certainly are well prepared to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bolognese, do you have any further questions?
I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Bergstrom, I see a question or comment. And again, I'm mindful that Dr. Evans has a prior commitment. This was a last minute scheduled meeting, compliant with open meeting laws, of course. And I want to be mindful of her time. Ms. Bergstrom.
It is 12 o'clock. Are we going to extend the meeting to a time certain or continue on without Dr. Evans?
My intention is to continue on without Dr. Evans. When we tried to continue to a time certain, we could not find a time the entire afternoon that the committee could be in attendance.
I thought Chris couldn't be here past noon. Can you clarify, Chris?
No. My issue is later this evening.
Okay.
I was just gonna weigh in that I think it's an important conversation for us to have with Dr. Evans, and there's, I think, 509 participants who'd like us to see us having that conversation with the superintendent as well. So not knowing when your engagement ends, Dr. Evans, would you be able to join us if we went into recess until 1:30?
I'm sure I can be back by 1, and then I'll ask the Rotarians to try to put me early if possible. So if you're willing to recess till 1, I can return.
I'm happy to make a motion and then we go into recess until 1 o'clock.
Second.
I would need a roll call for that. Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are in recess until 1 p.m. today. I will post something on this page in a moment indicating that we are in recess.
Thank you. Read my mind.
Thank you.
we'll wait for Dr. Evans before we call ourselves back to order. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us that opportunity. We are returning to session. I just want to double check that Mr. Nixon can hear us. I know he is on remote.
I hear you loud and clear, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Nixon. We are back in session. I would like to remind the audience that we are continuing our meeting that began at 11. We took a 1-hour recess at noon. We are not taking public comment. We took public comment at the beginning of the meeting. We are returning to discussion and deliberation on the topic at hand, which is return to school 2020-2021 discussion and action. As we were discussing, I will return to committee members if they have questions or comments that they would like to make. Ms. Marchant?
Can Dr. Evans, when you're ready, I would like to reaffirm that we have been getting a lot of pressure from the commissioner at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to not go the full remote route. Is that correct? And he is stating that there are certain funds and opportunities for our kids that will be withdrawn if we were to only go with the remote option. Is that true still?
So two things, and there was a call with the commissioner while I was speaking at Rotary that Jenna and Emma took, so she may want to jump in. There may be more information that she can share from the call today. What I heard the commissioner say is that the recommendation of his task force was a full return to school at 3 feet for all students, and that they felt that was safe. The three options that they asked us to look at were included a hybrid return and a full remote for some students. They started off saying some students who had medical issues, and then kind of morphed into for families who felt that that was a need. There was strong pressure from the department not to elect a full remote return, and some suggestion that some of the federal dollars that we've been promised that flow through the state would only apply to a hybrid return and not a full return, although it's unclear how much power they really have to withhold federal funding for that purpose. They also suggested that if it's not safe for students to be in school, then we shouldn't be having students play sports at any point either while we're fully remote. So that's what I heard. I don't know any more than that. Jen, is there anything from today's call that you feel able to share that would help answer any of those questions?
So there was talk about clearly what's going on around the state with concern from stakeholder groups who talked about, obviously, community pressures, teacher pressures, all those pieces, and trying to appease all of that. He did say that that no matter where your school committee lands, because there was a lot of questions about this, no matter where your school committee lands, we will work to support you no matter what you need. To the athletics, he said that there will be a discussion, hopefully a decision next week. Originally, other New England states were planning to do some kind of modified fall sports, but on his most recent call with the other commissioners, it looks like they may be pulling back on that.
Meaning no sports or full sports?
No talk of full sports. They were only talking about modified to begin with. And now they're talking about that may have to come off the table, although no decision is made on that.
And that's no matter what model we choose.
Right. This is a separate sports group that they're working with, the MIAA and all those pieces, that group.
We're also hearing from the federal government that they are considering withholding support to districts who do not go part-time in person. Isn't that still true?
So that didn't come up in the meeting at all today. It was just, it was literally between our break right now. So that piece didn't come up. There was no talk about funding, except for some pieces around technology, which thankfully we're in a really good place with. So they were just, that was the only funding discussion today.
Don't we also qualify proportionally for well less funding than many other districts because of our economic advantage, both for federal dollars and for state dollars?
Right. Typically, we don't qualify for most competitive grants, and clearly our funding that comes in based on our, like when they look at free and reduced and our Title I numbers and all of that, clearly ours are lower. So we certainly get less than other communities.
So it doesn't appear that our funding would be necessarily at risk, no matter what model we choose. And I imagine there would probably even be legal challenges to withholding funding based on communities trying to choose the plan that they feel safest is for their kids. And also the commissioner has given school committees local control to decide this. So
Yeah, so there wasn't, like I said, other than a little bit of talk about transportation, which is the same as we already know, and about sports, there wasn't explicit funding discussions today. But there certainly was the acknowledgement that this is complex and maybe more, like we've all said, right? More complex than we thought out of the gate, and those pieces, and very much to your point, he did make very clear it is a local decision that has been put in the hands of school committees, and was actually pretty good about saying, I know there's pros and cons to that, and they're in a tough place too, right? Everybody's trying to do the best they can through this whole thing, and if they made a decision for the whole state, we'd have, just like we have competing stakeholders, they would have competing stakeholders all over the state with their pieces. So I think they're trying to give as much autonomy but guidelines as well, but of course it's frustrating for all of us. So truthfully, the call was not as much new information as recognizing those pieces, I think. And that's my interpretation, only because those are usually only calls just for the superintendent. So Judy would know better about the tone from the past couple of ones, because I wasn't on those. So
just to clarify on the funding front, I would not recommend that the school committee consider funding aspects of this as the primary driver for what you recommend. But I would say that the grants that are not, that they're sending to us are not entitlement grants that can be spent on anything, and Ellen can weigh in on this. These are more reimbursement grants for specific categories of things related to a hybrid opening, and not designed to support costs associated with a remote opening. So for example, if we spent $200,000 on PPE that we never used because we never opened the building, there's a chance they could disallow that because we bought it and we didn't use it. But I wouldn't let your decision be driven by that. I think I try not to worry too much about the things that are out of my control. I'm very worried about funding this under any scenario. This year is going to be extremely costly. Whatever we need to spend is going to be far in excess of our allocated budget from the town. And so we're going to need to tap into as many multiple sources of grants and other revenue sources that we can get our hands on, including FEMA reimbursement, which I discussed with Rick Tustin yesterday, who's the fire chief who's managing that for the town. An additional $2 million that came to the town that we could tap into for reimbursement, an additional $1 million, a little over $1 million in CARES Act and in COVID money, that's federal money that's coming through the state. And perhaps if the federal folks decide for additional allocations, more funding that way. But what happens is, because it's a bureaucracy, a lot of times the funding doesn't come in a timely fashion and will not come in time for us to do a lot before September. And so we're playing a little bit of catch up. That being said, the state legislature was generous and gave us a couple $100,000 more than the town manager had budgeted for aid to schools, which is great. And as Michelle said, I think because we are a growing district with a growing high needs population, our enrollment related and high needs allocations are usually higher. We're not generally eligible for the competitive grants, but we will go after everything that we possibly can in terms of dollars. So I wouldn't let that drive you, but we should go in with our eyes open that there is if we do go full remote and stay that way for the year, there could be a financial impact. Just to be clear about that, the most significant financial impact is going to be felt on people who are furloughed, because there'll be categories of employees who will need to furlough. And that is an expense on the town side, that is an expense for those families. And I don't think that we can know with certainty when we'll be able to open, if ever, this school year if we go full remote to start. Because I think getting into the cold and flu season is going to be very difficult for us to reopen. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands all of the variables, and there's no right or wrong decision that you can make today. And whatever decision you make today in a week could get reversed because of the course of the illness or some determination by the governor. And so we have to be prepared for anything.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Evans. Oh, Ms.
I
Bergstrom.
was a question right before we went on break.
Yes.
And this is something that Dr. Evans just said, and I'm hoping that Dr. Ellen Emma can weigh in on this for curriculum and instruction. We know that consistency is really important for kids in education. We know that having regular schedules that they can count on and sort of a coordinated way to deliver curriculum and instruction and set expectations for our kids. We know that the first 6 weeks in school in person is often the time that we do that. It's going to take us 15 weeks to get to 6 weeks of in-person instruction by only having our kids in front of us 2 days a week. In a full remote learning model that we could devote 9 weeks to and have a consistent, predictable schedule around, pedagogically, is there any value in that for our teachers and our kids to be able to say, we're going to build a full 5-day remote learning plan versus a program that bounces between expectations that happen in person and the kind of instruction that happens in person, and then 3 days of not having that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sorry, are you asking me or Judy?
Your curriculum instruction.
So yes, I mean, I have to say, and I know this has been echoed, but I haven't had a chance to say it. So I just want to say this piece that, you know, everybody, our parents, our kids, our teachers, everybody did like an amazing job in an emergency situation in the spring. And, you know, Carolyn Plosky today noted it's like being a beginning teacher, right? A student teacher again. I think it's even more than that, because the truth is the emotional turmoil that everybody was going through during that time, the uncertainty, the fears, like all of that really is not a reflection on what it could look like. And so certainly we're not out of those times. And as we talk about a second spike, we have to expect that there will still be emotional turmoil for everyone involved. But certainly the practices that we learned and what we have seen from what the educators were willing to put in and do and learn that quickly. I mean, I've said this before, this is like an unprecedented summer. In my whole career, I've never seen this kind of work. Not just the amount of people involved or the amount of work, but the attitudes, the mindsets, the work that they're doing, honestly, is the most authentic and meaningful curriculum things I've ever seen in my career in actual planning, not in theory, in the books, in the actual planning. So I have full faith that what we move to, whatever happens, that our educators absolutely will be able to do that. As Judy and others have mentioned, it will never be perfect and it will never meet everyone's needs. But I think we need to note that our current system doesn't meet everyone's needs too. I know it's what we all know, so we're comforted by it, but this return to what everyone calls normal certainly had its problems and its flaws, which we've all been working on. And we know as we look at our data and our student youth risk and all of those pieces, we know again and again, there are more things that we could do to support our students. So the only thing I would say is to just try to start with that clear mind of, you know, just what we've known doesn't mean it's the right answer. And certainly in these times, as we've all talked about, nothing's going to be what people want it to be. Even if it looked like people think they want it to, you would still be having the emotional responses, because that's what we're teaching our kids, right? We're humans, we're both cognitive and feeling beings. And so all of these pieces will play into whatever model we roll out. But I absolutely think our teachers could do and have shown that they can do what needs to be done, and they have that growth mindset, and they are digging in and engaged and involved. This isn't happening everywhere. It truly is remarkable. And so that's the long answer to yes. I think that they could be ready for whatever it is we need to do.
Thank you, Dr. Ellen Emma. Are there additional comments or questions from the committee? Ms. Marchand.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll be brief, Chris. It's just one question. It's really targeted toward the role that teachers play in personally interacting with our children, even though it will be socially distant. And maybe Jason or any of you can answer this. You're all exceptional professionals. So isn't there something very powerful? And again, I'm thinking about the kids who are not only abused and neglected, but whose parents have to go to work and all of those kids. Isn't there something very powerful in being in the same room with their teachers? I am so concerned that we have two very vocal camps here. We have the all remote and the all in, and they both have extremely important points of view and needs that we as a public system have to address. And so it's this balance of, are we in a place where the transmission rate, the positivity rate is low enough at 1% that we can manage to at least get a little in-person time in order to meet those needs, at the same time that we're working very closely with the public health department, with the DESE professionals, in order to say, wait, this is when we are going to go completely remote because transmission rates have hit a 5%. And before I let you answer, I just want to make a clear note from my understanding of the data. And again, there's many models thrown at us, but I'm going to stick to the Department of Health because that is whom we designate as our health epidemiological group. So all of those models are showing that we have it, at least in our area, somewhat contained, whereas when Georgia reopened or some of the other school districts tried to reopen, they had as high of as 12 point something positivity rate, which far exceeds our even hypothetical 5% rate. So I want people to understand that it's not so clear cut. Georgia opened and they had to shut down immediately. They had not yet controlled their transmission rate. They were still the highest district of positive COVID results in Georgia when they reopened. So there seems to be some misunderstanding about the level of control we have over COVID. I am not ignorant, nor am I trying to suggest that I know anything public health doesn't. But our public health professionals are the ones who can tell us, listen, you're not yet in a good place to open, but we're not getting that information. So back to my original question, isn't there a benefit to having even minimum contact for our highest needs students?
So Zena, I think one of the important things you're hitting on really is about the relationships between our educators and our students. And that really is where the rubber hits the road, is the formation and the building of those relationships. I am not aware of any studies that target specifically building those within the same room. The importance really is within building the relationship with our students. I would add to it, though, that the piece around proximity that people certainly have concern over is the social isolation that has brought with some of our students over the course of this pandemic. And that is where I think some of the natural inclination to bring students into a classroom of such comes in, is the need to not want to be isolating our students and drawing them out. How that gets accomplished, I don't think there's any one way to do that. And I think when we think just about one way of accomplishing those things, we turn down a lot of great ideas. Yes, there absolutely is importance in engaging our students. How that looks is obviously something that has to be built on.
And to follow up,
can I just finish my stream? I'm sorry.
You can, but I want to follow up on what Mr.
Ms.
Levine.
Marchant and then Ms. Bergstrom.
It's okay, follow up, because I keep losing my streams, but go ahead, Michelle.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Jason, if we were doing a hybrid model, wouldn't we have teachers who were solely building community online because half of our classes for middle and high school would be online. They would have to be building community online, as well as some other teachers who were building community in person at 612. So to your point, we're going to have to think outside the box about building community no matter what model we choose.
I'm not clear if that was a question or.
Well, we're going to have our teachers learn to build community in multiple ways, no matter what model we choose. Isn't that correct?
I would say our teachers have already done amazing work to begin doing that.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Ms. Marchand?
Thank you. The other point I want to make is we can sit here and debate, and Dr. Evans, jump in if I get this wrong, but we can sit here and debate this level of detail versus that level of detail. But ultimately, it is on us today to decide which model to put forth to DESE, whether we like it and feel that it's a complete model or not, because we are under a strict deadline of August 10th. I know some districts have gotten exceptions, but I'm sure they've had some reason for it. Maybe they have more students, a diverse socioeconomic pool of children, whatever it is that they got it. We have not gotten an extension. And today, or by August 10th, we need to give you a decision one way or another. Is that fair to say?
Dr. Evans?
Yeah. Yes, we need a decision by the 10th. There's a process by which Brian could write a letter begging for more time. But what I would say is any decision you make today could change tomorrow or next week or the week after. And so agonizing over what the decision should be, what I would suggest is that you don't narrow options for people yet until we know what is feasible. And we won't really know what parents and community members want until we send the questionnaire that says, do you want hybrid or do you want full remote? If you decide to put the whole district on full remote to start, then you don't know what percentage of people would have preferred hybrid. And so staffing levels or illness levels may force us to do full remote. It is very, very difficult to pivot from full remote into a hybrid once the year has started because of the pattern of illness in our students and teachers that happens when the fall months unfold. And so my strong recommendation would be to submit both options. I understand that there are some committee members or parents who feel, and many teachers who would far prefer to start fully remote and then pivot to hybrid over some time based on some undetermined metrics or illness levels or some other factors. I think that's a lot more difficult than trying to start hybrid in the beginning. I think it's very difficult to do it quickly. And I want to get back to something Michelle said, which was, isn't it better to have a full remote predictable schedule for students and teachers for some period of time and then transition to hybrid? The problem is that I need to staff for multiple eventualities. If we're ever going to go hybrid, we need to staff that way, and not knowing when that will happen means that even a full remote model starts as the hybrid staffing level and schedule, right? And so it does mean front loading a lot of the academics, and it does mean the special. We can't pivot that quickly and do a whole new schedule that's a hybrid schedule, because I won't have enough staff members for when we go to remote. And we won't know whether the remote works because we haven't started it. And so it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but I don't want to set an expectation that suddenly we can just go back to what we would have done and make that a hybrid schedule. Even in the best of times, an ideal fully remote schedule is difficult to staff, particularly with special education, and Pam, I know, can speak to this. And so I would make a plea not to spend too much time agonizing over these two options today, because they're very likely to change in the coming weeks, but it will at least give us an opportunity for families to weigh in on critical things like, do you want full remote or do you want a hybrid? Just my
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
And it's no secret that we still are in negotiations with our unions, so that could impact any model. And that is just part of the whole process, that once we vote, there's still a lot of work that has to happen anyway.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Marchand.
Will we have, I'm sorry,
Ms.
will we
Bolognese.
have further detail on what a remote, I don't know, what a full remote learning option would look like as time goes on over the next few weeks, depending on what we vote today.
Ms. Bolaños, could you clarify, do you mean a full remote under a hybrid model or a full remote as in everyone full remote?
As in everyone full remote. And well, actually both, sure.
Dr. Evans.
So the full remote option, while some students are hybrid, is very challenging to staff, as you might imagine, and is fully dependent on which students choose the hybrid model and what courses they have, especially at the 6 through 12 level. And so as I've outlined in the plan, it really is going to require a lot of hard work, especially at the high school level, to match up the courses that students have asked for with people who are available to teach it remotely. And so what it's going to look like is heavily determined by which teachers are available, which teachers we can have who are teaching partially in person and partially remote. And so that matching those two is challenging. Under a fully remote model, we start first with the most at-risk students and build our schedules for those students first. And then we build schedules for students who have to be clustered for service with the service providers who are available. And then we build the full schedule. But the problem is if we spend a lot of time doing that and we ever expect to come back in person, it's going to be hard for me to staff up. In other words, add additional staff members that will be required to move to a hybrid model. They won't be available. It'll be during the school year. It'll be very tough for us if we start in a full remote to go back to a hybrid at any point during the school year with any certainty. And so that's the complexities of staffing and scheduling that is hard for me to explain in 10 words or less. But if there were an easy way to do it, I would do it. Every other district is in the same boat. The state has asked us to do an impossible task, which is offer a lot of options, provide robust services to a diverse population with many different needs, and do it well with expectations of the excellence that Winchester Public Schools has stood for decades. And it is an impossible task. Despite that, what Jen is saying, she's looked for the silver lining. She's found amazing work this summer on curriculum and instruction. And I'm fully prepared to say that what teachers see in the fall for anybody who's remote, and in fact, even if we start hybrid, everybody will have some remote experience. That will be much more robust, engaging, and rigorous than what they saw in the spring with a lot more teacher contact every single day. And so I don't think you can go wrong in your recommendation to submit the two plans to the state. I understand the pressure for you to start fully remote. I've outlined my reasons why I think it would be a mistake, but we may be there anyway if I can't staff the hybrid. And so that's kind of where we are. We're between a rock and a hard place, and we could argue for 5 hours today about which model is better and what's going to be better for students. And there are so many variables that we'll just have to be flexible and patient and understanding that this is extremely destabilizing for everybody involved.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I agree that we could probably go on about this for 5 or 6 hours, as we already have actually over the course of 2 days. I would like to state my thoughts on this issue, that I find that I'm deeply concerned about what I've heard from all of the parents, all of the teachers, and the students who have reached out to us. I'm concerned about the inequities in our schools that are potentially exacerbated during remote learning. Children of working families and lower income families, children with special needs, and our youngest learners, even simply our less motivated learners, self-learners, all if they're unable to come in person, are at a significant disadvantage. I worry that remote learning, unless and even if absolutely essential, fails to be the great equalizer that it can be. And I worry both the hybrid and remote options have significant limitations due to that time away from school. At the same time, we must be nimble and able to adapt to the current pandemic and keep our staff, students, and families safe. No plan we approve will be static, and we will adapt as conditions change, both in the community and in the state. And so as such, I support a phased approach. As we have done in the state and with other areas of reopening, a phased approach allows us to measure and see if we're successful. Currently, our school buildings are closed and have been for 5 months. The next step is not to stay closed or do full remote, but rather to move to a partial reopening as all other parts of our community have done. At the same time, we need to be ready to pull back and move to remote. Only after successful proof that hybrid return is safe would I be amenable to ever considering a full return for all of our students. And finally, as Mr. Nixon has alluded to in his motion, we must have clear metrics on how we move between phases of reopening prior to the start of the school year. As with all aspects of this entire process, we must work with the state, the health department, Department of Public Health, to develop these metrics, and we will before the start of school opens. And so, having listened to everyone here and for all these reasons stated above, I support the plan that Dr. Evans puts forward today, the hybrid plan, with all those caveats that we need to have metrics in place and we need to be able to move quickly. Thank you. Mr. Nixon, are you still thinking of putting forward a motion to amend the document as presented? Mr. Nixon, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Can you hear me now, Brian?
Yes, we can hear you we hear you very well. Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Do you hear us? Hello. Mr. Nixon, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we continue to hear you.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
We hear
Mr.
you.
Chairman, do you hear me? So
Yes, we
sorry
do.
about that. I'm remote at a hockey rink now, so having some device problems. So thank you for your patience with me. So sure, the chair asked in the first half of our meeting after I made the motion if I might consider a change, and I've reflected on that during the break. I really should have been clearer when I made the motion. My interest in engaging with the Board of Health would absolutely include the director of public health, that's Jennifer Murphy. So just like when I think of school committee meetings, I think of Dr. Evans with us at the head of the table. Her input is essential. So I should have made that a little bit clearer. And I've also thought a bit about some of the mechanics about how we go about posting meetings, how we post meetings, how we sort of herd cats together. And certainly we have many examples in our town where we post a meeting and we welcome members, elected or appointed members of other committees to join. So in thinking about it during the break, I did come up with a revision. So Mr. Chairman, what I would do is withdraw my original motion. I've shared with you through Google Docs a revision and would ask if you don't mind to share that, if you can share screen.
I will proceed to do that if I'm capable. Do you see the amendment?
Thank you. And so what I would like to do, just once again from the top, so everybody can follow this, I'd like to make this is a new motion, to amend our Winchester Public Schools Return to School Plan. Page 14 of the draft plan, following this existing paragraph, the district has strengthened connections and a process to work with the Winchester Board of Health to share information and ensure compliance with statewide and local guidance and plans, including health and safety updates, COVID-19 testing availability of flu vaccines, etc. I move to add the following. The school committee will invite the Winchester Director of Public Health and the Chair of the Board of Health to participate in regular school committee meetings at least every 3 weeks this fall. The first to be held before the first professional day of the school year. To A, review and understand current Winchester COVID-19 infection data. B, discuss a representative demographic area for ongoing monitoring, could include Winchester plus some number of surrounding communities. And C, to discuss key metrics and threshold values which will trigger a change in operating model, whether to a more or less restrictive one. And then I've added the purpose of this engagement with local public health officials is to help the school committee establish and monitor appropriate metrics and benchmarks.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Are you making a motion to amend as you just stated?
I am. That is my motion.
Second.
Is there, Ms. Bergstrom seconds. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Marchand. Ms.
Oh,
Marchand
yeah,
first.
can go first.
I just had two questions. Well, I guess the first one is we are saying here at least every 3 weeks, and I am wondering if that will be enough. And then also for the start date, the first to be held before the first professional day of the school year, is that early enough? Or should we really be following this over the coming weeks or in advance of the first professional day?
Yeah, if I may chime in, appreciate
Mr.
those
Nixon.
questions of Karen. So note that I'm saying at least every 3 weeks. So what I am a little ignorant of is how we sort of go about collecting the data, how it gets sort of scrubbed, validated, and then shared. As we all know, we tend to meet every 2 weeks anyway as a school committee. I'm thinking about the onset of symptoms associated with this virus, the recovery period for a virus, and so to me, the 3 weeks is kind of that's a maximum interval. I'm not comfortable going more than 3 weeks without those discussions. I would welcome, frankly, as a standing agenda item, engagement every 2 weeks, and if the data is coming to us through a fire hose, if we need to discuss it each week, we could do that as well. As I've mentioned to the chair before, on certain heavy lifts on the part of the school committee, things like redistricting or a superintendent search, we do on occasion meet each week when warranted, and I'd certainly be willing to do that. So the three weeks is simply setting a maximum. And then to your question about before the first professional day, again, I'm not saying the day before the first professional day. I agree very much with your suggestion. We should do it as soon as feasible and as soon as possible, and I would welcome that. But I think it's very important for us to have this session and have a direction and some understanding before our teachers are showing up for work.
Thank you, Ms.
Ms.
Marchand. Are you all set? Ms. Marchand.
I have a question. I'm just worried if this isn't a duplication of effort, because we have a subcommittee, I believe it's called the Health and Safety Subcommittee for Reopening or something like that, that is staffed by doctors and others. Am I misinformed, Dr. Evans?
No. The Health and Safety Committee has representation from each building, the DPW and nursing, and focuses more on issues related to gathering information about ventilation, HVAC requirements, disinfecting and cleaning, and so forth. What I would say in response to this, and this will not come as a surprise to Mr. Nixon, I shared this with him, he did raise this with me. I think it's a good idea to invite the Board of Health. You cannot compel them, so putting it as part of our plan that we will do it. Unlikely we'll be able to do this every 3 weeks with the full Board of Health. It's just logistically not reasonable or likely. I did speak with Dr. Bottari myself earlier in the week, and she gave me some excellent suggestions and suggested that she wanted to be involved in determining the metrics and benchmarks that would trigger a closure or a reopen. Really, I think this is moving into the realm of operations and not a school committee policy or big picture issue. There's room for disagreement with that. I'm sure Mr. Nixon will disagree with me on that. But the responsibility for determining the appropriate metrics and benchmarks, certainly the school committee should weigh in on that. But school committee monitoring illness rates, meeting with the Board of Health every 2 or 3 weeks, I think moves into the realm of operations. Certainly it's my responsibility to do that. Jen Murphy and I speak very regularly, several times a week, sometimes every day, sometimes multiple times a day during the course of the illness. And so this is something that I think most school committees would delegate to the superintendent to manage. That being said, I think an initial invitation to the Board of Health to meet with the school committee is a good one. We only have a few weeks left before school starts. I think it's unlikely you'll get them in before school starts, but you can certainly set a separate meeting and invite them. We have a full agenda on our next meeting already scheduled. So this is not something that I think is necessary, although I'd be willing to modify the plan to include close contact between the Board of Health and the school committee. I think it's not necessary and not advisable to do this every 3 weeks. And you can't
Dr.
tell them to do it in any case.
Dr. Evans, if I may point to some changes which I think are different from the original motion that Mr. Nixon put forward. The term it says invite. So it's at the discretion, obviously, of the Director of Public Health. And it's no longer the entire Board of Health, it's simply the chair of the Board of Health. And then two other changes that I noticed were that it no longer says discuss and develop, it's simply discuss in sections B and C. Your points are still taken. I just wanted to point out those changes in this motion from the original motion.
No, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you for pointing that out. What I would say is, I can live with this if you say regularly, and certainly the public health folks, just like Jen Murphy is an employee of the town as I am. Some of the other board members are volunteers who may not be able to make our meetings at the time that we have them. So maybe the chair will. These are all people, we value their opinions. We want to talk with them. But a lot of that happens during the day in our meetings that are coordination meetings in terms of operations. So just, I can, Brian, I can live with this. I still don't think it's the school committee's role in establishing and monitoring metrics and benchmarks to the degree I think that's operational. But again, anytime you try to get something done with a group of people, it's always more time consuming than trying to get it done through operations. So defer to you on this one, but that's my feeling.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bergstrom.
Yeah, I thank you very much for that, Dr. Evans. And you know how hard we appreciate the operations staff is and how much we value their opinion and their deep relationships within Winchester. But honestly, I have to speak honestly and from my heart. If the Commissioner of Education, if Commissioner Riley put the decision on superintendents whether to open schools or not, I would completely agree with you. Unfortunately, the commissioner has delegated the authority of whether to open schools to school committees. And therefore, we're being asked, as Ms. Marchant has brought up today, she has delivered some statistics from the rate of COVID infections and tried to position those as whether it's safe in school or not. We are neither public health officials nor physicians on this committee. And I think it would be helpful for this committee to hear from those individuals directly if we're going to be the ones with the responsibility for the students and teachers and the ability to keep them healthy in schools. We appreciate the leadership team is doing that as well. But I think the greater collaboration and shared knowledge we can all have around that, the more comfort we can offer our staff and our parents in the community that we're making decisions that are based on data. I would actually recommend that we put this motion forward and also put forward equally both the hybrid and remote models and direct the leadership team to begin preparing a remote model. What I've heard here several times today are the words inevitable that we're going to go to remote learning. We don't expect to get more than a few weeks in with a COVID case. We may have kids out for 14 days. We may have cohorts of kids out 14 days. And yet we don't have a fully robust remote learning model developed in the program we're developing to the state because the state has asked us to put forward one primary model. So until we have these metrics and thresholds, I'm just not clear how we can be asked to make this decision.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Are there any more additional questions on the motion at hand? Ms. Marchant.
I don't understand why we would, I don't want to belabor it and I'm fine, but just one more point. Isn't this better said to our chair, Mr. Vernelia, that we want you to add to the agenda the public health department's feedback? I don't know why we're modifying, not that it's a big deal, but we're modifying the plan to include these words. Like, we all want more information. No one's asking for less info, but does it need this formality that then binds us in the future where we can be having many more conversations than even what this suggests? Shouldn't it be to the discretion of our chair to invite people to our meetings?
I would ask Mr. Mr. Nixon if you would like to address that. The entire document is a living document. We'll be going with change. So I appreciate not binding our hands. At the same time, I think that many aspects of this document will change probably the week after we submit it. So I think that we need to understand that this is a point in time. But I would ask Mr. Nixon if he could address your points particularly.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Marchant, for the question. So I guess I'll go back to the expression I made earlier in the meeting, and I apologize if it sort of maybe strikes some as corny. I really do feel like, and can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good. So I feel like the beginning of each school year is an exciting journey. And what's different is we're living with COVID. And so I am uncomfortable that this plan we're developing articulates some different pathways, right? So I don't want to start a journey that may become dangerous without knowing what we need to look for to understand it's time to turn around and come back. Time to turn around and shift gears. I think, as we've all said previously, tremendous amount of work has gone into this. What's missing, I think, is just some acknowledgement of a process and how we might engage to get information to help us understand when and under what circumstances we change gears. Do we upshift or do we downshift? I think our community deserves that. And I might also suggest, I think there's something else valuable here in that if in working with our public health, local public health leaders, we come to establish some thresholds, some benchmarks. We discuss that publicly. That gets covered. That gets published. And then, just as we see daily updates on the state infection rates, it will be covered what Winchester's rate is. We can be monitoring what our sort of local demographic area is doing with respect to infection. And I think it's helpful for families and teachers alike to know that if there is some threshold that once we hit it, we're going to have to evaluate change, that we can anticipate that decision coming, if that makes sense, rather than we go some number of weeks into the school year and then based on some updated reporting, there's now a decision that we have to change. I'd like that as much as possible, not to catch families and teachers by surprise. And I feel like this is a way to get at that. Although that, frankly, that's more secondary, to be honest with you, but I think it's an important point.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. If there's, is there more discussion, Ms. Bolognese?
I would just say, in concurring with Ms. Bergstrom, as the state has charged school committees to make this decision, then I think we need to be as informed as possible in order to make our decisions. So I would appreciate having a regular meeting to discuss the data.
Thank you, Ms. Bolognese. If there's no more discussion on the amendment, I would call a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye. You're sharing your screen, I think, still, but I'm saying.
Oh, I am still screen. Hold on, one moment. Mr.
Aye.
Nixon. Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom? Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion is unanimous. Ms. Marchant, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask if you could elevate, I think our Director of Special Education, Pam Gerard, is back. If you could elevate her to panelist, please.
Yes. I am in the process of doing it. Thank you very much.
Done.
So we return to the main motion, which has not been made yet, whether somebody is ready to make a motion to support the plan as amended by Dr. Evans. If there's more discussion or if somebody's ready to make a motion of some sort regarding the plan.
Can I have a
question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Nixon.
So I might ask Ms. Bergstrom, if I put her on the spot, just to clarify a request she made a few minutes ago, that work continue on developing a more fulsome and detailed remote model. Is Ms. Bergstrom suggesting we vote here and now, but is she making a motion to further give some direction to administration on developing that remote model? I just want to be sure I didn't lose that train of thought.
Thank you. Ms. Bergstrom.
I think that's what would be suggesting that instead of prioritizing the hybrid return to instruction, that since we have acknowledged that we are going to need a full, robust remote learning plan at some time in the near future based on infection rates that we are seeing rise in Massachusetts and other communities across the country, that I would suggest that our motion be that we submit both hybrid and remote learning plans to the state as our priorities, with the decision to be made by public health and the school committee jointly we can name a time certain to determine which of those forward fully with when we can be returned to school in any capacity.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Any comments on what Ms. Bergstrom said? As far as that was not particularly a motion, I don't believe, but it was a comment on what you would hope to attain. Dr. Evans.
So I would respectfully push back on the notion that we have not developed a robust distance learning model. We have developed a very robust distance learning model, a remote learning model, both for the 3 days that our students are not in person, and also for those students who choose that option. What I can't show you are sample schedules because I don't know which teachers will be teaching which courses, but we certainly have been doing a lot of planning for that. And I don't want the community to think that if they select a remote only option, that we have not been diligently planning and hiring and trying to match up the teachers who need to work remote with the students who also need to be remote. There is no more robust model that I can come up with until I know who is choosing full remote and who is going to be in person and what the teachers are who are available to teach each. What I would say, and I have not articulated this well, evidently, because it keeps coming up. If we are to move to a hybrid model at some point early in the fall, then we need to hire and staff and plan for a hybrid model and not for a full remote model that could go for the full school year or half the school year. There's a difference in staffing levels and the actual physical schedule. If we have a full remote model for all, that does not then transition to a hybrid model at some point to be determined in the fall or the spring. And so the inability for us to know when that return to hybrid or transitionary or full return will happen limits our capacity to plan the full remote model in the way that I think some people might expect us to. Similarly, I have said repeatedly that we might have to go full remote for a class, a grade level, a school, or the whole district. And really that's going to be my determination, just like I do on snow days, based on consultation with public health and what the metrics are, and certainly discussions with school committee, although we have to pivot quickly. Won't be able to wait for a school committee meeting to determine that. And so if we start the year in hybrid with some students in full remote, and then some portion of our population goes to full remote, then they stay on the hybrid schedule, but it's just all taught remotely. And so there's it's impossible for us to plan for 4 now models as opposed to the 3 that we've been planning for, given the insufficient resources and availability of staff to do all 3 at the same time. And so it's really important that you hear that, because I don't want people to think, particularly as Michelle pointed out, the predictability of scheduling is important. If students start in hybrid or full remote and some students then go to also full remote, they'll stay on their same schedule unless we determine that the full remote is going to be for a whole semester or for the rest of the year, in which case we could pivot and then at some point, sometime later, reassign teachers and make a schedule that looks more like a typical school year schedule. But in any case, and Pam knows this well because she's the one doing all the individual schedules for the kids who might be full remote, it is incredibly complicated to try to match the right staff members, many of whom are only certified to teach one thing, and only qualified to teach one thing, and only a few of those in some categories with the students who need those services. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with any vote that includes any caveats. We'll come back when it's safe to do so, because the metrics are not determined. And the state has already determined that it is safe for us to do so. And so I know that we might have different feelings in our community among some members, but just want to make sure that everyone's really clear on what we can and can't do. If the school committee voted today to say we're only going to go full remote and it's going to be for the first semester, then I could pivot and make a model, and that would be a different model, but that would not serve our students well, and I would not recommend it. So that's kind of where I am, Brian, on.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I think that that what you said is clear. But I see a shaking head from Ms. Bergstrom that it's not clear to her. So I would, Mr. Nixon, if you'll hold, since it was from a question from Ms. Bergstrom, I will go to Ms. Bergstrom and then return to Mr. Nixon.
I just want to clarify something that you said, Dr. Evans. So you are saying that if we begin the year in a hybrid model and we need to pivot to remote learning, we will have to retain the hybrid model. That's my first question. However, if we...
So let's stop there. So the hybrid model schedule, we have to retain, but it is taught remotely.
Right. If we begin the year, and if we begin the year in a hybrid model, we may not have all the staff available to us to teach necessarily the classes we need, either in person or remotely.
Can you say that again? I think if we start the year in a hybrid model?
Hybrid model, we may not have the staff necessary. For example, I'm thinking of the science teachers at the middle school. We have 4 science teachers at the middle school. I'm pulling these numbers out of my head now because I don't have like staff lists in front of me, who need to be remote. We may not be able to staff in person, even under the hybrid model, the science department at the middle school. Yes or no?
No, not accurate. We would hire replacement teachers for those teachers.
Right. So that would be substitute teachers that we would have to go out and seek, or temporary teachers, not Winchester staff that we currently have.
Well, no, they'd all be Winchester staff because we'd be hiring them. But
hire them.
Right.
But it would be staff within our body of people to replace them.
So what makes this question complicated, and you're an educator, so you know this, in some cases we can compress classes depending on how many students choose remote, and assign an existing middle school science teacher to be the remote science teacher. In some cases, we have to hire a replacement. And as Lori knows, there are all kinds of reactions of teachers and other staff members to coming back to school. And some of them are requesting a full year leave, and we've already hired a leave of absence replacement or in the process. Some have requested family care leave, which is only in increments and only goes till December. Some will be able to teach remotely based on medical, and some will be able to teach in person. And so there's no model that's going to guarantee us adequate staffing if you choose it today. And so I think that that's important for everyone to hear. But we'll do our best to hire the best and most qualified teachers and leave of absence replacements that we can when it's necessary, which is why the criticism about not having published sample schedules for the remote model is so important for you to understand. It's that not knowing which teachers and which students need to be remote and what their learning needs are, it's difficult for us to, every schedule will look different depending on the availability of the teacher, and their schedule will have to be done essentially by hand. And so it is a very challenging procedure. So the problem comes in the transitions, going back and forth as a full district and as an individual class, and who is going to teach that class. And it's all quite complex and challenging. Despite that, I still think bringing some students back in person is the right thing to do.
And I understand the value of bringing students back in person. I'm not trying to devalue that. I'm trying to understand, we continue to talk about under the partial remote model, the limitations of staffing, but it sounds pretty clear from what you're saying about the inability of many of our staff to come back for health reasons, that even under the hybrid model, many of our beloved teachers may still not be back with our kids in person because they're simply not able to come back. And there may be many substitute teachers taking the role of the, I just want to be clear with our community that the hybrid model isn't a return to normal, that there may be many staff missing, replaced by new teachers, staffed by substitutes. But, and maybe Ms. Kirby can confirm this, if we began the year in a full remote model for the first 9 weeks, every teacher we have in the district would be able to teach under a full remote model because they would not have the limitations of illness for themselves or illness from their families.
Ms. Bergstrom, I'm surprised you said return to normal because I'm not sure that anyone in this entire meeting has used the word return to normal regarding a hybrid meeting. So I want to be clear that I don't think anybody representing in the administration or school committee a return to normal anytime in the near future.
No, and I'm speaking about the expectations of parents in the community, Mr. Vernalia, not this committee or the staff in front of us. So I'm just trying to understand our staffing limitations and the ability to fully staff and be able to get our kids the classes they need, to be able to get the support they need. I believe that this committee has been emailed by many academic special educators that have indicated that a remote model can be highly successful for students with special needs. And I'm trying to make sure that we pick the model that gives Winchester most high quality Winchester staff and the fullest body of Winchester staff possible.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Is there any, oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think I took up Chris's time, so.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Marchand, I'm going to let Mr. Nixon speak first. Mr. Nixon, you are muted again or silent. We cannot hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that.
It's like a Verizon commercial.
I know. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm sorry, guys.
No
so
worries.
I just want to offer a few quick comments. So I really appreciate Ms. Bergstrom bringing up these points and getting into the weeds. And the weeds is usually where I am with this committee. There's a lot of important stuff in the weeds on a lot of subjects, here included. So I want to just make a few observations that as we all know on this committee, and for those listening in right now, we've just gotten such a volume of questions and comments from our community. And we often say to those who would like to communicate with a school committee but are sort of reluctant to do so on any subject, there's no such thing as a dumb question. That's especially true here. And I must say, I've been getting so many questions, including I got an email from a parent at 2 o'clock this morning with some really good questions about what full remote would mean. I don't have answers to those questions yet. And I would expect that Dr. Evans doesn't yet either. And I think that's certainly how I take Ms. Bergstrom's point, is that because there are so many moving parts and so many unknowns associated with a full remote model, as Dr. Evans says, it's complicated. But we have so many questions and they're all good questions. I support, to your point, Mr. Chairman, that Ms. Bergstrom's initial statement really didn't feel like a motion so much as a statement, but I want to add my voice to it. That I think more work needs to be done here, and it's as simple as going through the trove of emails from parents who are asking questions about the full remote model, to either do our best to get answers to their questions or to identify some common themes and do our best to push forward and build answers and to build structure, if you will. My two other points, my sense is that I wouldn't bet on this, but I would not be surprised if we have as many as 20% of students who choose not to come back in the fall. Someone, I think, even threw out that statistic earlier today. That's just a gut instinct that I have. That's a significant number of kids. And I want to be clear because I'd have to go back and look for it in the plan. I think, Dr. Evans, you maybe have used the expression in some of our meetings, students and families who maybe have a medical waiver or medical condition who seek, who choose not to come back on a hybrid model, who choose full remote. I want to be sure if I heard that correctly, I want to be clear that I cannot support some threshold for families and students to have to meet in order to be eligible for the full remote. If there are students who have health conditions, of course we respect that. But if there are families who simply are not comfortable knowing now what the plan looks like in sending their student back to school and they choose full remote, I support that choice and we need to support that choice. So I really want to be clear about where I stand on that and give the superintendent an opportunity just to clarify that. I can't support a plan in which a family would say, well, we're just not comfortable. Yes, we took the survey 3 or 4 weeks ago, and yes, we had indicated we would likely come back. But given what we know today about the virus, given that we understand the hybrid model, the AABB model, we'd be more comfortable keeping our child at home. I want to respect that. So I wanted to just ask that question and ask the superintendent to address that.
Dr. Evans, I know you've addressed this before, but I appreciate the clarity of a response in this meeting.
Sure. When the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education asked us to develop this plan, the full remote model was restricted to children who needed it for medical issues. They've since pivoted in response to strong community feedback and suggested that we should develop a plan that would allow families and students to make the choice that's best for them, whether that's full remote or hybrid. But it did not give a choice for us to have everybody restricted only to full remote. And so, yes, Mr. Nixon, the families who choose full remote, if I am able to send them a survey tomorrow, if 2 options remain, will be accommodated.
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Are you finished, Mr. Nixon? Ms. Marchant?
Sorry, thank you. I feel like we're walking down a rabbit hole right now. We need to focus on exactly what we've been asked to do as school committee. And what we're getting into is the realm of crystal ball here. We've been asked to approve potential models that we have studied and that will work for our district. Now, all of these conversations, I know people don't share my philosophy on who should be doing what, but all of these conversations are asking us to put to place our decision making above the experts in the room. We have a very capable, highly professional, one of the best in the world staff, including our central district, our principals, everyone. I know what the teachers are asking for, and that has to come later. The union is tasked with representing their voices when it comes time, and we're in the midst of negotiations. All school committee is being asked to do is look at this plan and say, yes, this is the most feasible way to move forward. We don't need more metrics than they've already demanded of us. This is all in flux. We are starting to balloon this plan into something completely untenable, and we are creating so many pathways that is going to overwhelm our staff rather than helping them focus and get to work in their specialty. The teachers and the union have their role. Central office has their role, and school committee has their role. We are being asked to look at the plan, the feasibility, listen to our community, and go forward. We're not asked to set anything in stone. So I feel like we're extending into, like Chris said, the weeds that are so operational. I understand that Desi made the mistake of saying school committees who have absolutely no experience currently, especially in education, we are the budget and the policymakers, and that's it. Like, let's keep the conversation focused on what we're being asked. Nothing is set in stone. They haven't even given us the metrics. The public health department hasn't even given us the metrics by which our superintendent and her staff is supposed to decide further. they haven't stopped the flow of guidelines coming at us. What we're saying is, as of August 5th, I think that's the date today, this is what our community plan looks like. So I don't want to, I feel like we're giving the community a false sense of, number one, our role, and number two, how much work needs to go to open school in any way on September 14th. I say, let's look at the plan. The plan was very thorough, very well thought out. Let's vote on that plan and let the work continue. I don't want to give the community false hope of what we as school committee can continue to do.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. And I would remind you and the committee that, again, this plan is really a starting point. It's what we're going to submit to DESE, and that there will be changes probably on the 11th and the 12th and the 13th of this month as we know more. So I would concur that this is not a final document that needs to sit on a shelf, and we will review on October 17th and say, look at what we have in the plan that we did back in on August 5th. Ms. Bergstrom.
Except I fundamentally disagree. We are voting a plan that's going to drive the direction of this district for the next 6 weeks. This is policy. We are a school committee who sets policy, and setting what kind of schooling that our children are going to have and have available to them is absolutely policy. Yes, we should allow the educators and the experts in the room to figure out how to do that, but DESE has tasked us, and unfortunately, we bear the heavy burden of having to make that decision. We also bear the burden of being completely transparent with the public members of our community and knowing what choices they have ahead of them. We are mixing terms here. We are talking about a remote plan. There are two remote plans that we're talking about, and I'm not sure that even members of our community understand the difference. There is the remote plan that they can potentially choose from, which requires one level of staffing if we're in a hybrid plan and they choose to go remote. There's a second option of a hybrid plan, which would be a fully remote hybrid plan, which would be staffed and scheduled completely differently, that we, as Dr. Evans said, they have not had the time or the opportunity or the bandwidth to address a full remote learning plan that is an option in this document. Our community, our teachers, they need to know what school looks like, what staff is going to be available to them. And respectfully, we have heard from other experts, the educators in our community, who are saying they believe that a district-wide full remote plan is the most educationally sound way to go. That's not a union issue. That's the educators who spent years and years and years of time in school, along with our administrative staff, who are telling us that. I think it is absolutely our task here to decide whether we value that opinion alongside that of our leadership team. I think we owe the community the value of knowing whether we are, which plan we're going to go forward with, and that we fully understand it and believe in it, and that the community then knows the choices they have around those two options.
Thank
So,
you, Ms. Oh, sorry.
Any better way to be spending our time than helping members of our community understand that right now?
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. It is clear that this could be a 6-hour conversation, and if need be, I'm amenable to doing that. However, at the same time, it's also clear that I see individuals leaning different directions. If anyone is so inclined, I would welcome a motion regarding the draft plan put forward by Dr. Evans, and we will see where that would go.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Ms.
I hope I
Marchant.
get the wording right. I move that we accept the plan that includes the hybrid model as the most feasible. Wait, let me start over. I move that we accept Dr. Evans' plan as amended by Chris's motion.
Is there a second to that?
So
Are
if there's no,
we including,
I'm not hearing a second.
I'm asking
We're
if there's a second, and I think there was a question regarding the
are we
language of the motion. I
including-
will second the motion for the virtue of having discussion about it.
Oh.
Ms. Bolognese.
Are we including having the option of the remote learning plan in addition to the hybrid plan with that motion?
Can you clarify which plan you're talking about, Ms. Bolognese?
Sorry, background noise.
Are you, I guess I can clarify that. Are you speaking of the partial remote plan that parents would have available to them? Would we prioritize the hybrid plan? Or are you speaking about the 5-day-a-week full remote learning plan for the entire district?
I guess that it is the hybrid plan that includes the partial remote learning plan along with a remote learning plan.
Still don't get it.
what, the plan
Right.
that I'm moving forward is the plan as written by Dr. Evans, in addition to that, edit that Chris just made through motion. So as is presented from Dr. Evans with the amendment from Chris's motion.
So community members would have the option to pursue a remote learning plan if they so desired.
That is the plan as Desi asked us to do. Yes, they have.
That is as
that
the document is written. That is
Exactly.
correct.
As is written, right. That's my motion.
The chair has seconded that motion for this purpose of discussion. Is there any additional discussion on that motion? Mr. Nixon.
Just so for parliamentary procedure then, Brian, since you're the chair and you seconded it just for discussion, I'll second it so that we can vote it. But I just want to be clear, circling back to my impression of Ms. Bergstrom's remarks, I just want to be clear. I feel like there's more work that needs to be done on the remote model. And I think that Dr. Evans has acknowledged that. And this is an ever-changing landscape. And I just think we need to acknowledge the community. We're going to continue to work on developing those options. And I want to be, my message to the community is I know I've heard a lot of really good questions that I don't have answers to right now. And I'd like us to be able to get answers to those questions. But as you've said, this is a moment in time. This is a document for state. Things will change between now and the beginning of the school year. We just got to keep working on more fully developing the remote option. But I do second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I withdraw my second so that it's preferable not to have the chair second the motion.
I move to call the vote.
On the motion, I would roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
No.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The vote is 4-1 in favor. Dr. Evans, do you have any final thoughts before we move on to chair report?
I just want to thank the committee for all of your hard work to consider all aspects of this. With so many unknowns, it makes it very difficult to make decisions that you can be confident about. But please know that every question gets read and answered to the best of our ability, and we will continue to work very hard to support this. I'd also remind everyone that this is a rapidly changing situation. If I'm unable to staff the hybrid return, I might have to come to you and recommend a full remote to start for all. And so that's something that is out of my control in terms of personnel issues. And so we will be prepared to move into either a hybrid model or a full remote for some, or a full remote for all if I'm unable to staff it, using the hybrid schedule but just teaching it remotely. It is my sincere desire to work with the public health and other medical experts to have very clear guidelines about what would allow us to return fully in person or compel us to go to a full remote model if we're able to go to hybrid. We'll work really hard in the coming days to do that. I want to recognize that many educators on this call will be disappointed not to have a firm full remote for all as that they advocated for, but that we will work closely to look at each individual educator's situation to keep everybody as safe and healthy as possible. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us in the next 3 weeks. I'd ask for everybody's patience. Questions will be answered to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to work as hard as possible for everyone in our school community. And so I thank you for your attention and careful thought process as school committee members. We're not always going to agree on the best path, especially when the way ahead is so unclear. But I think we are well prepared to open school and give kids a great experience, regardless of the model that's chosen. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. And with that, I will move into the next part of the agenda, which is the chair report. We always tend to have these long meetings, and I would like to use my chair report to thank all of the members of the community, all of the teachers, all of the students who emailed. I was responding to emails last evening, and in the process of responding to one, I would get 3 while I was responding to one. And so I want to thank you for your feedback. I read all of it. I want to also apologize for those who got shorter notes than you might have desired. I was reading everything you were saying. I didn't always have an opportunity to give you my fullest thoughts because I actually had to get to bed and get up this morning to meetings. And so I want to thank you all. But lastly, I also want to thank Dr. Evans and all of your staff, who have been working tirelessly. I say this each meeting. I sound like a broken record, but I'm going to continue saying it. Thank you very much. This is, as I said during my remarks, this is not the end. This is the beginning, really. And I know there's a lot more work to be done, but I think with some focus from our approving this plan, hopefully that can make your work more focused as well, and maybe take a few things off the table so you can focus on the things that are still on the table. So that's what I'll use my chair report for. And thank you all, and move on to superintendent's report. If you have anything you'd like to add, Dr. Evans.
So just families and community members can expect to receive a survey that will ask them to indicate their preference for full remote or hybrid return to school. And from that, we'll be able to build our full remote schedules for individual students more robustly and assign staff to teach those. The individual teachers and staff members who've expressed concerns to us, they've already sent in. Lori Kirby will continue to meet and speak with each one to determine what their needs are. And as Jen has so eloquently put it, that we start the match.com and match up the available teachers who need remote with the available students who need remote, hire additional teachers, and do our very best to train everybody robustly for the first 2 weeks of teacher return from August 31st until we really start bringing students back the week of the 14th. And so we will continue to need to meet regularly. I would advise that we schedule another meeting for next week or early the following week to see where we are with this and give the community more information as soon as we know.
Thank you.
A point of information, Brian, for Dr. Evans.
Yes, Mr. Nixon.
Dr. Evans, so now that we have voted an amended plan, will you be amending the plan and posting that maybe as a PDF on the district website so that when you send out that survey, there's a link to the plan? We had, I think at one point, 521 participants in the meeting this morning, but that's still a fraction of all the parents we actually have in the district. So I just want to be sure everybody's got access to the latest information.
Mr. Nixon, that's a great idea.
Sure, I'll send out another link after I've revised the plan with the public health piece that you suggested in it. I'm not sure I have it electronically, so if you could send me that language, one of you send
Dr. Evans, I will send that to you immediately at the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you. So moving on to future agenda items, as I said, we don't have the list of future agenda items, but they are as indicated at our last meeting. Our next meeting date scheduled is August 18th at 6 p.m. As Dr. Evans has indicated, we will look to do a poll to see if and when we should meet before then. We have a September 2nd meeting at 6 p.m. and September 15th meeting at 6 p.m. schedule. I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, roll call vote is required. Mr. Nixon, Ms. Marchant,
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.